better. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Boccuni. Thank you for being here for this 45 minutes with the Good Lobby. Today, I will be talking about a quite misunderstood phenomenon, which is, in fact, lobbying. We don't go around the bush. We actually want to address the myths that are around this issue, and we think this could be very important and useful for all the organizations and the activists that want to bring more impact. Just quickly, how are you guys doing? Tired? Long afternoon? Is anyone sad because Britain is leaving the EU today? No? Someone is sad. Very well. I'm a sad bit too, I know. Very well. So quickly about myself. My name is Andrea Boccuni. I'm representing an NGO called The Good Lobby, which wants to demystify and democratize lobbying for civil society. I've been working at The Good Lobby since 2016, but first and foremost, I am a corporate lobbyist, meaning that for a big part of my professional life, I actually work for the industry. And this is where I get the sense that these tools that we want to share and use with society may actually have a big impact. I'm very sorry for this. Perfect. So, is anyone okay with the idea of lobbying? Have you heard this word before? Can you raise your hand if you heard the word lobbying before? Do you think this is something bad? No? I see some mixed feelings. That's 50-50. So before getting through this topic, I actually would like to taste the pulse of what do you feel about this word and about this phenomenon. My role here today is to give you three simple messages. I want to plant a seed that may or may not blossom in the future. Message number one, lobbying is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool. In the same way a communication tool can be used or misused, the activities of lobbying is inherently a communication effort. And as such, there's nothing necessarily inherently bad in it. It's just a tool. However, it does distinguish itself from other forms of communication, mostly because lobbying is boring. It sits on administrative and legal rules. To do good lobbying, you need to know better the rules. You need to be able to speak the language of lawyers, the language of politicians, which can be a bit boring. But once you understand how it works, and you actually realize that it can bring impact, you should use it. It's one of the tools at disposal of organizations and activists to exert more impact. This is a small audience, so I'll try to make it as interactive as possible, also in order not to have you falling asleep in the meantime. This is my first question to you. How do you define lobbying? Anyone wants to try? Influencing politicians. Anyone else? Influencing corporations. Do you agree with this definition, influencing politicians? No? What do you think? So you want to convince someone of your position. And so why is lobbying different from marketing? Isn't it marketing also an activities where I'm advertising and promoting a certain position? So that has to do with the recipient of the lobbying activities. So if I'm trying to convince you, it's just a chat. But if you would happen to be a politician, I would be lobbying you. There are some elements of this. The way we define it is that it's an activity that wants to shape the regulatory environment surrounding something. In other words, I want to change the law. I want to change a law in favor, or I want to change an environment that may be detrimental to my interest, defensive lobbying. Now, there is this myth that lobbying is against public interest. So lobbying versus the people. And I'm not arguing that this could be the case in certain situations, but let's just take a few examples. My first pro bono project as a lobbyist was for a European association called Opera Europe. I'm a musician, I like operas. They asked me to provide a strategy for their communication effort. So in order to profile operas and so all those activities related to arts in Europe, I need to do some background research, my homework. And I realized that in Europe, culture and sports are in the same budget line. So in any given year, if there is more sport, you will have less orchestras or ballet. If I have more ballet, I will have less volleyball. So that has to do with the rules of the game. It's not inherently bad, but it means that every time I'm advocating in favor of operas, someone in a sport field will be worse off. Another quick example. I've been working a lot with the health association. I've been working with the hematologist association, so blood doctors. Every time I was engaging with a politician or a representative of the European Commission proposing the position of a hematologist, that same person was not listening to someone representing Alzheimer's disease or lung cancer. All arguments that are equally important, but in my proposition towards a certain sector, I'm defining a particular interest. This is lobbying. Another question for you. Who is a typical lobbyist? An activist is, would you agree that an activist is a lobbyist? So and so. White, 50 plus, with a Lamborghini. Yes, this could also be lobbying. Now let's play a little game. Raise your hand if you think Coca-Cola lobbies. Okay, fair enough. Raise your hand if you think Google lobbies. Okay, now bear with me. Raise your hand if you think the Catholic Church lobbies. That's a very good point. Here in this slide, I put the Church of Scientologists. Why would a church lobby? In order to be recognized as a church. Because if that's so, you don't pay taxes. And that's the reason why Scientology has a big office in Brussels. So they want to be represented. Raise your hand if you think a city can lobby. Is the city of Paris lobbying? Think about European Capital of Culture, think about the Olympic Games. These are places where a city wants to profile itself towards other. Raise your hand if you think NGO lobbies. That's fair enough. And bear with me with my last point. Raise your hand if you think citizen can lobby. So this is just a little game to get you into thinking that lobbying is actually everywhere. Every association at a certain size or dealing with certain issue will be talking, lobbying with other organizations. That's a way to communicate. However, the point that we want to make and what we want to introduce here today in this afternoon is the concept of citizen lobbying, meaning you personally could be using lobby tools, the same lobby tools that Coca-Cola is using, and achieve a similar impact. I'll try to make a case. Now, you see two gentlemen on this slide. You most likely recognize the one on the left. By the way, he's coming to Brussels in February if you have any question for him. Does any of you know, by any chance, the man at the center of this slide? Not at all? No Austrian in this room, I suppose. So I introduce you to Max Schrems. He's an Austrian activist and a lawyer. He was only 22 when in 2010 he went visit studying in US. At that time, the discussion around social media was less heated than we have today. But at that time, he went to US, and he realized how particular is the use of Facebook of our data, how mischievous can be the use of data from social media platform. So he came back to Europe, and he sued Facebook to European courts on the fact that there was no control on how data gets used. The process that Max started
became the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Basically, the reasons why everywhere you browse, you need to accept cookies. So it created a set of rules that is basically the most omnicomprehensive and tough set of rules on data protection, so much so that this regulation is now copy-pasted by other countries. So Canada, Japan are using similar rules. Obviously, Max wasn't alone, and that was a movement that was led by several parts of society, but he was one of the first one, as a person, to sue Facebook. Many journalists at the time took it in a way like it was a bit of a David versus Goliath sort of approach. So appreciate the magnitude of these two actors. In our definition, Max is a citizen lobbyist.
Is it going? Working? Yes. Okay, I'll give you another quick story. Is there's any Mexican in this room? No, I knew. So I introduce you to Mr. Alejandro Calvillo. He was president of Greenpeace Mexico. And basically, Mexico experienced a strange phenomenon some years ago. So 3 Mexican presidents ago, Vicente Fox, when he was elected, he actually used to work for Coca-Cola for many years. He was a top manager of Coca-Cola. And during his presidency, he slammed soft drinks in every public event. He was really heavily advertising, promoting soft drinks. So Mexico, between 2001 and 2004, experienced a spike of child obesity of 40%. At that time, it was really difficult to frame the use of soft drinks in a way that is actually detrimental to public health. So one of the tools that this man used, and he was also able to enforce, was the introduction of a soda tax. An extra tax that would be applied on certain particular kinds of product in order to get some money from those companies and to be able to educate the population in a similar way as that we would do for cigarettes, for example. That's an act of a citizen lobbyist, because as an individual and with an intimate knowledge of the rules, the legal and administrative, and in this case, judicial rules, he managed to push this item forward. And that's a bit of the spirit of where the good lobby comes from. At the core, our 2 founders are in fact representative of the legal and the academic community. We see Lamin Kandahar, he's a pro bono manager at Dentons. Who knows Dentons? Never heard of? It's the biggest law firm in the planet. And you might be surprised to know that there are a whole bunch of lawyers, pro bono lawyers, who do lawyering for free. And there are people like Lamin whose entire job is to find more pro bono work for more lawyers. Here on the left, Alberto Lemano, professor HSA here in Paris. He started to sparkle this idea of citizen lobbying by using his own students, so by experimenting with his own students. How is it like to introduce law? How is it like to introduce elements of lobbying for civil society? The underlying idea in this process is that in the democratic life of a country, you, as a citizen, are usually asked an opinion on the tenure on the government, usually around election, which makes a beautiful we don't care in between. So how do you talk to politicians in between the election? How do you talk to your elected representative to make your voice heard? We think that our mission is to give this tool to civil society, to lobby, and to connect these 2 moments, to be able to speak, to be able to raise your voice. Now, the reasons why we think lobbying is important is because, first of all, lobbying is a legitimizer, meaning I'm going to bring an example from the European Union, but this is actually very much used also in other parts of Europe. In Europe, we have a lot of avenues of participation. There's many ways in which you as a citizen, as a European citizen, can talk to the EU. As a matter of fact, you have a higher chance to get your response from a commissioner of the EU than from your national ministers here in France.
So there are many ways that you can use to talk to the institutions, but these ways are underused and underknown. I'll give an example. Have you ever heard of the European Citizen Initiative? Anyone? Perfect. So the European Citizen Initiative is a petition. It's a form of a European-wide petition where if in a year you manage to gather 1 million signatures in at least 7 member states, the European Commission is forced to take into consideration your legislative initiative. This was set up by the Lisbon Treaty in 2014. Nobody knows. It's 500 million European. At this point, we should see a petition every Thursday. But we don't. We don't know it exists, and if we knew, we wouldn't know how to access this. Lobbying is also a mobilizer. It gets you humbler because it gets you to know the rules of the game, which can be tough because there's many trade-offs in this system. And that it's also a way to go beyond slacktivism, which is a term to intend, when you just put a like on a Facebook page and you feel you saved the world. But let me give an example. Raise your hand if in the past 12 months you sign an online petition. Now raise your hand if you know what happened with that petition. Fair enough. That's slacktivism. And then another point, lobbying is an equalizer. It has the potential to counterbalance the influence of the few, meaning those organizations that are able to influence decision-making in such a way. And that's a big point, because as I mentioned, lobbying is widely used by industry. That's why lobbying is usually associated with the industry. The potential is to use the same tools to uphold public good and public interest. I'll bring a case. Here I'm showing you lobbying in real time in the European Union. These are data coming from a tool online called the Transparency Integrity Watch, which is a tool from Transparency International. You can go and check it right now. Here you see data coming from the Transparency Register, which is a database that collects information coming from every meeting of every lobbyist with every official since December 2014. So in the past 5 years, we have tons of data around lobbying. You will be surprised to see how transparent this process actually is. Now, how do you measure lobbying activity? My professor at university used to say, how you measure the success of a cocktail party. It's similar. There's many ways. In this specific example, and by no means that's not perfect, but it gives a sense, we're measuring lobbying activity per numbers of meetings with the European Commission. So now you see that, for example, since December 2014, Facebook had around 120 meetings with European officials, which sounds like a lot. Now, this is the thing that I didn't expect to find myself when I was going through this data. In the top 10 organizations lobbying in Brussels, you find 1, 2, and 3 NGOs. Specifically, you find number 4, BEOC, which is the European Consumers Organization, so an umbrella organization that represents consumer groups all around the EU. Number 5, you find Transport and Environment, which is another umbrella organization representing NGOs working on transport and mobility issues, and WWF. Now, I think it's interesting and fascinating to see that WWF and Facebook had a similar number of meetings with Commission. And you obviously understand the magnitude of difference between these two actors, also the money and the resources they can put into this process. And yet, they both have a similar access to the institution. I'm not saying it will naturally or automatically transform into success, but that gives you a sense of how lobby works, which then gives us a clue on where the problem lies, meaning, do you think business is overrepresented? I would say the opposite. It's civil society which is underrepresented. Business will be business. Business will do business anyway. They have the money and the resources to do so. The point is to level up and professionalize the activities of civil society organizations.
And that's pretty much what we do at The Good Lobby. We work together with associations, we work with NGOs, we work with activists, universities, and students, and we give them the tools. Realizing that lobbying is just a tool, we want just to educate and provide better access to those tools. How? I'll give an example. This is a 10-step map to become a citizen lobbyist. It can go way more into details, and every step can go to a certain level of granularity, but the whole picture is there. So it is realistic, it is feasible to think that if you follow certain steps, your strategy, your campaign might actually be more impactful. Lobbying is by no means rocket science. It can be learned. And so you see steps, something like being able to do your homework, so which in lobby terms means know the law. So being able to identify every regulation that has any impact on the work you're working on. I'll give an example. 2-3 years ago, we had a lot of problems with the migration crisis. So we had a lot of NGOs that called us and say, Andrea, we want to have a meeting at the European Commission. We want to have a meeting with the European Parliament. We want to talk with these officials. And then I said, yes, fantastic, let's do it. But the EU is not competent on migration. As easy as that. So your lobbying strategy should have better be addressed at the member state level. Lobby Italy, lobby France, lobby Hungary. With this, I'm not saying that it's always easy, but knowing the rules, it's sometimes the first obstacles for certain organizations to have a higher impact. Step number 3, stakeholder maps. NGO talks well with NGOs. Industry talks well with industry. How about to mix it up? Would it be interesting for an NGO to partner up with lawyers, with social media experts, with lobbyists, with professors in university, to expand their capacity and be able to achieve more? Steps on how to build a coalition, so how to partner up with other NGOs to have a stronger message, and so forth. Again, it's not rocket science, but sometimes helps to have a roadmap to guide you through the process of a campaign. And also we do another thing. At our core, at The Good Lobby, we are actually a matchmaking operation. So we work with lawyers, and we work with civil society, and we match them. In several funny ways, in fact. We have certain format where we have a master class, where we have a room of 20 people, 10 NGOs, 10 lawyers, and we match them. In other situations, we do a hackathon, a legal hackathon. So we put in a room 5 lawyers, and by the end of the day, they need to hack a certain legal issue that an NGO is working on. LGBT rights, plastic in the ocean, emission trading schemes, anything that NGOs are working on with the support of lawyers. And so this is the work that we do. We provide civil society with these tools. We connect them with other parts of civil society that are equally interested in this process, and we try to achieve some more impact. I work in Brussels. We are also based in Brussels. You will think that organizations in Brussels might have a higher understanding of how the legal system works. That's not nearly the case. We run surveys through these organizations, and we know that almost every of those needs legal support. They don't have legal staff on board, so they could use free legal support. We also realize that that has to do with size sometimes. The bigger your organizations, the more likely you are to have lawyers and lobbyists or staff, which means that every other organization that is below this threshold can be helped, should receive some support. Let me give you some examples. We were the first one to file a European Citizen Initiative. We were the first organization to actually use these instruments that the European Union is giving us, petitions. Actually, you see here our founder, Alberto Lemano, and these were his students. That specific call didn't went through. We didn't manage to gather 1 million signatures in that year, but that was one of the push that created the momentum on the end of roaming charges. We worked a lot on a plain packaging scheme, mostly providing legal expertise on how to fight and how to challenge legally tobacco firms that were actually pushing for less regulation in the tobacco directive. One of our biggest campaigns was to draft a whistleblowing protection law. Do you know what a whistleblower is? Can you name a whistleblower? We have a few. One of the most famous lately was Edward Snowden to expose the activity of the NSA, the National Security Agency in the US. Well, you will be surprised to know that there is no law protecting whistleblower at the European level. We have a lot of these examples. I'm from Italy. We have a lot of these examples in Italy because this is criminal organization related. So those people that expose the activity of criminal organization should be protected. Surprisingly, no political parties in Europe wanted to take on this file, so we had to do it ourselves together with our friends at Transparency International. We drafted the text, which was approved by the Council in April, and it will become 27-wide law very soon. So that's a great way to scale up your impact. If you can't make it in your states, do it at European states, and that will trickle down to the rest of Europe. We also have an office in Italy. We've been working a lot in Italy. And here are some of the campaigns we've been working on. This is on the Freedom of Access of Information. Have you ever heard about the Freedom of Access of Information Act? It's super boring, it's legalese, but it's so impactful. This is when you ask a government the documents. You don't like that your government or your president had a meeting with ExxonMobil or Facebook? Fantastic. Get the minutes of the document. Get the email that they exchange with each other. Get the attachment to those emails. You have the right to get these documents, and you can ask. And by asking, you put pressure. You increase scrutiny over the institutions, and then they know that you are watching. Voto di scambio. In Italy, we have a system by which criminal organizations ask citizens to vote a certain party, and that party will be elected. This is illegal. So we put more pressure on those politicians that got elected via this way. We introduced the concept of an environmental crime, an eco-crime. And lastly, we asked for transparent election because many of our politicians actually have criminal records, so they are not absolutely clear, and yet they got elected, so starting from scratch. These are some of the elements that we want to play with. Administrative rules. Which means that in the past 5 years, we managed to support a bit more than 100 organizations. We matched more than 300 projects, and we generated a value in terms of lobbying in legal activities and legal support of a bit more than 300,000 euros. Now, this is a point where we got shamelessly commercial. We need your help. We need your support. We are building a pool of experts that are willing to work with civil society, that are willing to work for free. If you know experts that feel disempowered, that feel they are absolutely in need of contributing with civil society, the Good Lobby could be one of the answers. Think about all the university professors that are absolutely expert in their field, and nobody reads their article, and they know that they are so interested. Think about professors in environmental engineering, or in communication, or in marketing. In this very moment, we are actually in conversation with the European Commission itself as a way to use their pro bono expertise. Imagine the Commission is an institution that counts roughly 32,000 employees. And per law, they need to give one of their day a year for civil society. That's a lot of days. So we want to connect civil society and professionals. So if you know any of these professional experts, feel free to reach out. Now, in order to conclude, one of the things that we want to do is not only demystify lobbying, because again, there's nothing inherently bad in it, but also want to create a better understanding what lobbying means in practice. In particular, there is a certain idea that if we leave lobbyists to their job, the government will be captured by their activity. So there's no way a government can be free and be a representation of its electorate when lobbyists are around, which is fair, and it's absolutely true that more scrutiny and more monitoring should be done. But in a way, we're only focusing on one of the two partners. To lobby, you need two people. It's like tango. So if you're focusing too much on the industry, you're forgetting who is being lobbied, the institutions. So as part of our job is also to make those processes more transparent, having lists of politicians, who are they meeting inside and outside institutions. If someone is approaching a politician in a bar, or if you have one of those talks in a fair, or this kind of events. So while we want to keep an eye on the lobbying activity, we also want to level up the activity coming from civil society. Here are just some takes and some ideas. In the same way, you have a legal aid. So if you cannot afford a lawyer, the state will be giving you a lawyer to go to court. Why don't we have a lobbying aid? If you're an organization, an NGO that has a transformative purpose, but you don't have expertise on how to make it professional, let's support those professionals that are helping NGOs. Another example, let's open up parliamentary research services. Every parliament in every state has a research center that supports their lawmaking. We should open up that so that everybody knows what our politicians are reading and on the basis of which they're making laws. Lobbying incentives. Let's give tax breaks to those organizations that are supporting civil society. Or in general, let's support skill sharing. Maybe an NGO has needs in the social media area. Maybe an NGO needs project management support. This should be facilitated. Very well, so by the end of this talk, I hope I gave you the chance to consider 3 simple messages. Message number 1, again, by now you might have realized that everyone lobbies, perhaps even yourself in your organization or in your campaign, and that in fact there's nothing inherently bad in it. It's just a tool. However, in order to make it strong and to bring the impact that it's needed, it should be really rooted on the law, the boring part, the part that a lawyer would be happy to do in an afternoon. And lastly, you should consider using these tools, and if you never consider the political implication of your campaign, you should consider approaching a lobbyist, approaching a lawyer, and get closer to the expert pools that are around you. And with this one, I thank you. I would also like to 10 minutes for some Q&A if you have any questions, but that is my contribution to you, and thank you again. Any questions so far? Was I that clear? Thank you. Please.
What is the financial model of this organization?
So we receive institutional funds. So we have 2 foundations that support our activity. 90% of what we do is pro bono. So we deliver workshops, we deliver trainings, and we do strategy with the organization for free. Sometimes we do low bono. So we ask a fee that is below market price when we need to do some extra research. But to answer your question is institutional donations, so foundations. Specifically, we work with Open Society Foundation, and Adessium, which is a Dutch foundation. We have a lady over there.
I've seen vous m'entendez? Okay. I've seen recently for a law voted in France that the changing proposals from civil society or other sources have been published. Is it the case at the European level? You know, there was the first text, and then people can make, the French word is amendement, so I don't know the word in English. The changing proposal to the initial text. And in France, there was a kind of transparency about the sources of the changing proposals.
There is, I'm only referring to the European system, but for example, we have a revision system that by which every 5 years, a certain law or a certain packet of laws will be scrutinized again. At that point, the Commission opens up, and so you have a system of public consultation that can last between 4 and 8 weeks, where literally everyone can contribute. So we do have this system to propose amendments to a text, especially when this text is being revised. And this is, for example, one of those avenues of participation that are a bit misused and misunderstood, meaning many organizations could lobby for for the interests they're representing in a way that will force the institution to take it into account. So yes, also in Europe we have one of these systems. Yeah.
Thanks. I was just wondering if you were using civic tech or if you see any use of those new startups.
Of this?
The civic tech.
What do you mean?
Civic tech, so the startups that are developing tools, mainly apps, that enable citizens to be empowered in getting in touch with their MPs, with their representatives. So I guess I got my answer since...
No, at the European, or as much as we know, we don't use specific apps, but it is true that at member states level there are different ways to talk to your electorate. In Italy, for example, we had an online platform developed by the Five Star Movement where citizens can upvote laws and be in touch with the regulatory system. We don't use app as such, but this could be a great way to create more connection. The problem is that sometimes people don't really feel connected with European politics. It really feels like it's far, and there is no much of emotional attachment. Probably you also saw it during the European election, which is mostly talking about domestic issue rather than European issue. But no, indeed, that could be a great way to channel people's preferences towards elected citizen. Yes. I'll take a last one, and then I will stick around for anyone else that has other questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Andrea, for that very inspiring talk. I don't usually grab the microphone. It's not my style at all, but I thought I'd just reinforce something that you said here, because I'm the managing director of a lobbying organization in Brussels. I started the company when I was 27 years old because I felt that legislators were not understanding what the civil society and what businesses were telling them, and even what academics were telling them. So they do need translators. And they need you to speak up and tell them how to regulate, what to write, and how to organize it, because there's no point legislators producing laws that don't work. So rules matter, be heard, and that's very, very important. And Andrea, coming to your presentation and all the efforts of the good lobby, I can just only endorse everything. And I'd like to know, how do you see partnerships working? How do you see a company like mine, who's already doing about 30% or more of pro bono work, how could we collaborate? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question, because what my experience of this sector is that sometimes we have more offer than demand. Meaning we might have more lawyers happy to help than organizations able to take in this support, which has nothing to do specifically with organizations themselves. But the fact is that NGOs are terribly busy, and they are most of the time, they are lacking the bandwidth to deal with extra work. So it's difficult, but our work is in fact to be able to select and to sort those two elements in a way that the lawyer will feel empowered by giving it support in a way that is fully applied, and an NGO has the actual resources to be able to receive this support. So this is why I think it's important to raise awareness on the fact that lobbying, it's there and works, so that more organizations will take it into account from the beginning. Sometimes NGOs would just go for a Twitter campaign because they want to raise awareness of something. But sometimes you might not need it. Sometimes the same money could be spent on a lawyer and you may achieve the same or a bigger result just because you have more familiarity with how the law works. So also thank you for the work you're doing. Very well, I thank you again. I don't want to bother you endlessly. If you have any other question, I will be here and I will be taking all of that. Thank you very much.